My stepmom looked me straight in the eye and said, "You are not going with us. This trip is for a real family." I remember the room going quiet, slept, the sound of the television that had been playing low disappearing entirely. That sentence, delivered with such cold economy, was the trigger. They still planned to spend 10 days at my lake house without me, the house I owned, the one I had cleaned and prepared. So, I made one calm decision. I would go to the lake house early and change the locks. When they finally arrived, I would meet them at the door and say the thing I should have said years ago. "I will not let strangers in my house. My name is Tom." And until that moment, I was a person who believed that problems could be solved if you were patient enough, if you stayed quiet, if you worked harder than anyone else to prove your good intentions. I lived in a small apartment downtown, efficient and tidy, much like my life. I was in my late 20s, working an office job, building a life that felt physically stable but emotionally precarious. My shield was distance. I told myself that adulthood meant drifting, that families changed, and that the achy I felt when I thought about my past was simply nostalgia for a different era. That era was the lake house. Not a grand mansion, but a cedar-sided rambling place with bare wooden floors that were cold in the morning and smelled perpetually of pine and lake water. It was the only place I ever felt truly safe. My earliest memories were there, my mom humming as she made breakfast, the sound of my father already outside on the dock, checking the water level like it was his sacred duty. That house had the version of my family that felt real, unbreakable. Then the breaking began. My mother's sickness was fast, abrupt, and final. After the funeral, the lake house became a tomb of memory. My father changed. Grief hollowed him out, leaving a space he didn't know how to fill. A few years later, he remarried. Rebecca moved in with her 2 daughters, and the energy of our home shifted. I was never yelled at or confronted. Instead, I was subtly edited out, furniture rearranged, photos replaced, inside jokes I wasn't part of. When I left for college, coming home felt like visiting a distant relative. The house itself came back to me through my mother's side of the family. My aunt loved the place, and when she passed, she left it to me. Legally fully mine. I should have sold it, yes. That was the practical choice, the adult choice. But I couldn't. It was the last piece of the real family I had left. When my father and Rebecca started asking to use it, just for a weekend, just for a few days, I said yes. I wanted to believe my generosity could fix the emotional distance. I wanted to feel included again. So when they suggested a summer vacation together, all of us under one roof, I felt a genuine flicker of hope. I convinced myself this was our reset, our chance to finally act like a cohesive family unit. I had no idea I was preparing the venue for my own replacement. The idea came up casually in their living room. Rebecca mentioned how lovely it would be to get away together before summer ended. A few days by the water. Time to reconnect. Robert, my father, simply smiled and nodded, the same way he always did when he was too tired or too afraid to argue. "It could be good for all of us," he said. That was all I needed to hear. Something tightened in my chest, a desperate need for that simple inclusion. From that moment on, I threw myself into the planning. I drove the 40 miles out to the lake house on my days off. I aired out rooms that hadn't been used in months, washed every sheet, and took inventory of what groceries and basics we would need. Standing on the dock, watching the sun set over the lake, I told myself this effort meant something. That families don't heal overnight, but they heal through showing up. I was showing up, And that was the lie I was still living by. The subtle warning signs were there. Rebecca talked about sleeping arrangements without asking me. And when I tried to chime in, she would smile faintly and change the subject. But I ignored the tight, churning feeling in my gut. I told myself I was just being sensitive. I kept cleaning. I kept planning. I kept believing in the lie. The false hope I carried felt heavy, like a fragile glass bowl I was determined not to drop. I spent 2 consecutive weekends driving up to the lakehouse, pouring hours into making it ready, trying to manifest a welcoming family atmosphere through sheer physical effort. I scrubbed the ancient stone fireplace, aired out the bedrooms, and spent an entire afternoon replacing mismatched towels. The lakehouse was vast, and the task of preparing it for 7 people. Rebecca, my father, her 2 daughters, and their respective partners, felt endless. I calculated the cost of the groceries and supplies, money I never expected to see back, and consciously dismissed the nagging resentment. This was an investment in my peace. I remember standing in the main living room, wiping down the mantelpiece. That mantel held a deep scar where a childhood toy had once been flung into it during a burst of laughter. Now, the space was empty, waiting to be filled with new, shared joy. I allowed myself to dream maybe we would all finally sit around that fireplace at night and laugh, and the awkwardness would dissolve. Maybe Robert, my father, would look at me with the easy pride he used to show. It was during one of these solitary cleaning sessions that the first major intrusion occurred. Rebecca called. She didn't ask about the house. She immediately launched into logistics. "We are thinking the girls should have the master bedroom, since they will be there for the full 10 days, she said, her tone definitive, not consultative. I paused, holding a dust rag. The master bedroom, technically, was the largest room I had always shared with my parents, the room with the best view of the water. I was going to use that room. Actually, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. It's the one I always stay in. A small, dismissive sigh came through the phone line. Tom, this is a family trip. It is easier if the girls are comfortable. You can take the guest room over the garage. It is quiet, and honestly, you won't be spending much time in there anyway. The choice of words stung. Not our family, but the girls. I felt the familiar tightening of my shoulders, the urge to protest, to cite ownership. But I reverted to the old script, the lie: stay quiet. Don't make it harder. Okay, I conceded, letting the dust rag drop onto the floor. But did you tell me you invited Sam's partner? That makes 7 people, not 6. Oh yes, of course, Rebecca chirped, as if this were an irrelevant detail. We invited him ages ago. He is practically family, Tom. The irony was immediate and sharp. An acquaintance she'd known for 6 months was practically family, yet I, the owner, and the son, was relegated to the garage. I didn't push it. I simply wrote 7 people in the notebook I was using to track supplies. A day later, my father called. I thought he might be calling to check in, or perhaps even to apologize for Rebecca's high-handed planning, but he sounded preoccupied. He was calling to ask me if I could buy extra specialty coffee, because Rebecca had run out, and she cannot start her day without it. He didn't ask how the repairs were going, or if I needed help. He simply relayed a request. Robert, the man who used to teach me how to tie fishing knots on the dock, was now acting as Rebecca's personal assistant. I tried to pivot the conversation. Dad, are you excited about the trip? I really hope this helps us reconnect. There was a heavy pause on the line. Yes, Tom. I am sure it will be good for all of us. I just need to make sure everything is smooth. His focus was clearly on the smoothness of the logistics for Rebecca, not the emotional effort I was expending. After the call, I walked into the old, cramped study. The shelves were filled with books my mother had collected. On the wall, half hidden by a cheap tapestry Rebecca had hung years ago, I found a framed photograph. It was of me, maybe 7 years old, standing on the dock with my mother, both of us grinning, covered in mud. A moment of true, uncomplicated belonging. I realized then that my current fight wasn't just for a seat at the table. It was a desperate attempt to protect that memory, to reclaim that safe space from the people slowly erasing it. I wouldn't sell the house because it was the physical representation of the ghost I was trying to hold on to. I packed up my cleaning supplies and drove back to the city. The weight of the coffee request and the 7-person guest list feeling heavier than the actual effort I had put in. I was ready to face the final planning meeting, still clinging to the foolish belief that my preparations would buy me the love and acceptance I craved. The final planning meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening, 2 days before the trip. I drove to their house with my notebook, the same one detailing the 7-person guest list and the expensive specialty coffee, tucked under my arm. The knot in my stomach was now a cold stone, heavy and immobile, but I pressed on, clinging to the belief that simply showing up, being prepared, would earn me a seat at the table. When I arrived, the house felt sterile, brightly lit, and somehow too silent. Robert was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, a bottle of beer on the coaster next to him. Rebecca was not seated. She stood near the entryway, arms crossed loosely, yet maintaining a posture that was definitely hostile. It was a subtle signal, one I had learned over years of observation. She was about to deliver something unpleasant, but she wanted to maintain the veneer of detached control. I opened my notebook to the first page, the inventory list, and tried to start the conversation professionally. Okay, so I have the groceries sorted. I think we need to consolidate the cooler situation, and I just wanted to confirm the time we are leaving on Thursday. Rebecca did not move or relax her stance. She said my name once, sharp and slow, like a physician delivering a difficult diagnosis. Tom. I stopped writing. Yes. She took a breath that was shallow and unnecessary. Well, I have decided that it would be better if you did not come on this trip. I laughed. It was an involuntary, small burst of air, a reflex born of sheer disbelief. It felt like a punchline to a joke I hadn't heard. What do you mean? Rebecca didn't hesitate. Her eyes were fixed on a spot just above my shoulder. This is really about family bonding. A real family vacation. The words landed on me with the physical force of a heavy weight. Real family. It defined me out of existence. My hand started to shake, causing the pen to skip across the paper. I looked away from her, my gaze snapping to my father. He was staring intensely at his own hands, which were resting limply on his knees. I waited. Seconds stretched out like elastic, silent and agonizing. I didn't plead with Rebecca. My entire focus was on Robert. I needed him to look up. I needed him to veto her, to show me that the connection we once had, the unconditional love, still existed. I needed him to validate me. I finally managed to speak the question thin and quiet. Dad, is that how you feel, too? He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He shifted his weight, and then he said nothing at all. He never looked up from his hands. That silence was the final, critical injury. Rebecca's cruel words were just the tool, but his mute avoidance was the act of abandonment. He was actively allowing this exclusion to happen. He was choosing convenience and peace with his wife over the defense of his son. The lake house, the cleaning, the hope, it all crashed down on me. I realized how ridiculous I looked, standing there holding a notebook full of meal plans for people who didn't even want me at their table. Rebecca, sensing my complete breakdown, stepped in to smooth the edges of her cruelty. She added that they had already taken the time off work, that everything was arranged, and that I could use the house later, as if she were offering me a favor, a bone tossed to a stray dog. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply nodded once, closed my notebook with meticulous care, and walked out. I didn't trust my voice to say goodbye. In my car, I sat for a full 5 minutes before I could turn the key. My hands were shaking so violently that the steering wheel felt unstable. The immediate, searing hurt slowly burned itself away, replaced by something much colder, much harder. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not thoughtlessness. This was a choice, and my father had ratified it with his silence. By the time I reached my small city apartment, the resolve had settled deep in my core. I was done begging. That night, my small city apartment felt suffocating. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and stood staring at the wall, the fluorescent light of the kitchen buzzing faintly overhead. I wasn't weeping. I was frozen in shock, my body performing a silent, internal triage. The scene at my father's house replayed on a loop. Rebecca's unwavering voice, the word, real, and the sight of my father's head bowed low. A picture of absolute abdication. I kept seeing the notebook, the meticulous list of groceries and cleaning supplies, the symbol of my foolish, futile labor. I had treated their approval like a transaction, believing that if I simply paid enough in effort, I would receive inclusion in return. Now I was left, holding the bill for the privilege of being dismissed. I paced back and forth, from the cramped kitchen to the living room window, like a caged animal trying to burn off the shock before the anger could truly ignite. My mind kept chewing on Rebecca's phrase real family. It became an echo, a ridiculous empty sound. If I wasn't real family, why had I been good enough to clean the house, to stock the fridge, to hand over the keys without question? The logic was flawed, insulting, and, finally, clarifying. The anger settled in, not as an explosion, but as a dense, cold mineral in my core. It was the quiet, precise kind of anger that demanded clarity, not retribution. It didn't demand that I shout or break things. It simply demanded action that was proportionate to the betrayal. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Robert's number. The instinct to call, to force an apology, to beg him to choose me, was still strong. But I stopped. I knew exactly how that conversation would go, apologies wrapped in excuses, promises that changed nothing, and the eventual, slow erosion of whatever tiny bit of self-respect I had left. I wasn't going to let him off the hook by giving him the easy path of a tearful conversation. I set the phone back down. Instead, I walked over to my laptop. The apartment lights felt too harsh, so I worked by the glow of the screen. I pulled up the documents related to the lake house. The deed, the tax assessments, the legal transfer papers from my aunt. I wasn't looking for a loophole. I was confirming a fact. I read through the documents slowly, twice, confirming every clause. There was no confusion. There were no shared controls or rights of access. The ownership was fully, completely, and legally mine. The certainty of the law was a balm against the chaos of the emotion. For the first time since that terrible meeting, my breathing steadied. The law, unlike my father, was completely reliable. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. I didn't hint at it on social media. I didn't call my friends to complain. This decision was purely mine, a self-soothing act of sovereignty. It was the moment I realized that the lie, that I had to earn my place, was poison, and the truth, that my space was inherently mine, was the antidote. I called my office the next morning and fabricated a vague illness, claiming I needed 2 days off. The hours I spent the rest of that day were dedicated entirely to planning my defense. It wasn't a spontaneous, vengeful act. It was calculated. They thought they had arranged everything. They thought they had secured their vacation by excluding the host. I would show them that they had arranged the circumstances for their own failure. I scheduled the locksmith for the following morning. The lakehouse was my last physical connection to my mother, and the only place that truly felt like home. If they had decided I was a stranger, then they had lost all rights to my generosity, and certainly to my home. The road to the lakehouse felt fundamentally different that morning. It was the same 4-hour drive, the same familiar curves through the dense pine forest, but the feeling wasn't one of nostalgic yearning or obligation. It was cold, focused, and purely tactical. I was driving toward an action, not a reunion. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the house was perfectly quiet, exactly how I had left it 48 hours prior. It stood peaceful, slightly weathered, and entirely mine. I walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking softly under my weight, and let myself in with the old, familiar key, knowing this would be the last time that specific piece of brass would open that door. I toured the house slowly, deliberately. I ran my hand over the kitchen counter I had scrubbed. I looked into the master bedroom, the one Rebecca had unilaterally assigned to her daughters, and felt a chilling lack of resentment. The anger had refined itself into a simple, executive clarity. I wasn't doing this out of rage. I was doing it to establish a boundary that should have been set years ago. I sat at the sturdy oak kitchen table, the centerpiece of every summer meal from my childhood, and allowed myself a moment to feel the weight of the moment. The sadness for the family I had lost. The anger, the way they had tried to usurp this last haven, and the finality of the choice I was about to make. Then I picked up my phone and called the locksmith. He arrived within the hour, a quiet man with kind eyes and a large, heavy toolbox. I explained the situation with professional detachment, telling him I needed a complete, immediate re-keying of all exterior access points. I did not mention the word family or vacation. I simply said I had a legal issue with access. He worked quickly, efficiently. The sound of the drill biting into the metal of the lock mechanisms was loud, yet satisfyingly precise. It was the sound of something permanent being sealed. He replaced the old, simple cylinder locks and added new, unpickable deadbolts to the front and back doors. When he handed me the 3 new, cold, clean brass keys, they felt heavier than they should have, like physical tokens of my newly reclaimed authority. I paid him in cash, thanked him, and stood alone after he drove away. I didn't feel victorious, I felt steady. With the locksmith gone, I picked up my cell phone again and made the other planned call. I reached Alex, a close friend from college, who was reliably honest and reliably fun. "Hey," I said. "I have the lake house this weekend. It's fully stocked, cleaned, and there is nobody here. I was wondering if you and the others wanted to come up. Just us. Friday through Sunday." He immediately agreed, and the shift in energy was palpable. The lake house, I realized, didn't have to be a painful shrine to a lost past. It could be a place of genuine, easy connection, defined by respect, not earned through accommodation. That evening, I cooked a simple meal, pasta with garlic and oil, and ate it on the back deck as the sun dipped behind the western ridge of the lake. The air smelled of pine and warm wood. The water was perfectly still. This place had always been about belonging and safety, and I finally realized that if they had decided I wasn't family, I owed them nothing. The house was a gift to myself, a fortification of my new boundary. I locked the new deadbolt before bed and slept better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow they would arrive, slept expecting everything to be exactly the way they had planned it, assuming their entitlement extended to my legal property. They had no idea that they were driving toward a locked, silent rejection. I woke up early the next morning, slept well before my friends were scheduled to arrive, and well before the others were due to make their entrance. I hadn't set an alarm. Yet I felt a coiled tension in my chest, a hyper-awareness that was sharper than caffeine. I made coffee and sat by the window in the living room, the one that gave a clear, unobstructed view of the driveway and the lake beyond. The light was stretching across the water, soft and promising. I checked the time. They should be about an hour away. The surprising thing was the absence of nervousness. I thought I would be sweating, rehearsing defiant speeches, perhaps even feeling a momentary wobble of guilt. But there was only the cold, hard certainty of my decision. The shame was gone, replaced by self-possession. There was nothing to rehearse, because I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need their understanding. The only thing that mattered was what I was going to do. Around noon, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel announced their arrival. It was loud, demanding. One car, then a second, pulling in close to the front porch, as if they owned the very stones they were parking on. I stayed absolutely still, a shadow in the window, and watched the performance unfold. Doors opened. Laughter and easy, casual chatter carried across the short yard. Rebecca stepped out, looking relaxed and proprietorial. She gestured toward the house, perhaps pointing out rooms or assigning tasks. Her demeanor that of a host in her own domain. Robert was next, automatically pulling duffel bags and coolers from the trunk, moving with the heavy, dutiful obedience I knew so well. I watched the casual assumption of their comfort, and a sliver of dark satisfaction touched me. They were acting entirely within the lie they had constructed for themselves. Rebecca headed toward the door, reaching into her purse for the key I had intentionally not retrieved from her during our terrible meeting. She walked up the steps confidently and slotted the familiar key into the lock. She turned the key. Nothing happened. I watched her body language closely. First, confusion, a slight, puzzled tilt of the head. She turned the key again, harder this time, jiggling the handle. The wood of the door didn't budge. Robert stepped closer, took the key from her, and tried it himself. He was stronger, twisting the metal with real force. Still, the lock held firm. His brow furrowed in a familiar gesture of annoyance, the kind he usually reserved for technical glitches. He tried again. One of Rebecca's daughters rolled her eyes and muttered something about the house being old. They laughed, assuming it was a stuck bolt, a momentary inconvenience. Then the energy shifted. The laughter died. Rebecca, now visibly tightening, moved to the back door, taking the whole group around the corner of the house. I heard the faint clank as they tried the back door, and then the muffled sounds of frustration. When they returned to the front, the pretense of calm vanished. Rebecca's voice carried now, sharp and irritated. She pounded on the door. Not a friendly knock but a demand. "Tom," she called, using the old name that felt like a relic of the past, yelling through the wood. What is this? What did you do? I waited a beat longer than necessary. I didn't want to startle them. I wanted them to stew in the recognition of the problem. I wanted them to register the fact that they were locked out. Then, I walked deliberately to the door. I did not fling it open in an aggressive gesture. Instead, I unlocked the chain and the new deadbolt. Just enough to open the door a few inches, creating a narrow, fortified barrier between us. I looked out at them, and my expression was one of mild, calm interruption. Yes, I said, keeping my voice low and completely steady. Can I help you? Rebecca's face flushed scarlet. She had anticipated a broken key or a forgotten code, not me standing calmly inside. Her mouth opened, then closed. What did you do to the locks? She finally hissed, her voice tight with disbelief. Oh. I replied, my tone deliberately absent-minded, as if the answer should have been obvious. I had them changed. Rebecca's face shifted from flushed disbelief to cold, pure fury. Why would you do that? I shrugged slightly, the motion small and contained within the narrow gap of the door. Because this is my house. One of her daughters, Sarah, stepped forward, her voice rising in a squeak of indignation. We are supposed to be staying here? We drove all this way. I know, I said. You told me. I spent 2 weekends preparing for it. Robert finally spoke, stepping out from behind Rebecca, his face creased with panic. Tom, this is not funny. We drove 4 hours. We took the time off. I am not joking, I stated, my voice refusing to rise to meet the tension. I just made a decision. Rebecca crossed her arms, trying to reclaim authority. You cannot just lock us out. We already planned everything. That is interesting, I said. I let the silence hang heavy, savoring the moment of the reversal. Because last week you told me this trip was for family only. Her composure cracked. Do not twist my words. I am not twisting anything, I replied. I listened very carefully. My father, your husband, listened too. I turned my gaze to Robert. Did I miss you, her dad? Did I imagine the phrase real family? Robert opened his mouth. And for one desperate second, I thought he might finally choose me, that he might finally speak the truth. But he closed it again, his lips pressing into a thin line. He looked back at his feet, defeated. Rebecca immediately stepped back in front of him, protective and venomous. We meant this was time for us. For our family. I nodded slowly, letting her statement sink in. Right. And you were very clear that I am not part of that us. You are being dramatic. She spat. No, I corrected her, quiet and firm. I am being consistent. I am treating your words as truth. Sarah scoffed loudly. So, you are seriously doing this? Punishing everyone because your feelings got hurt. I leaned against the door frame. I didn't punish anyone. I simply decided not to lend my private home to people who stated, explicitly, that I do not belong to their family unit. Rebecca stared, stunned into momentary silence by the flawless use of her own logic. We have a right to be here. You do not. I countered immediately. You have a habit of assuming you do. That is the difference. Robert, recognizing that the situation was escalating far beyond a simple argument, finally stepped forward, his voice low and desperate. Tom, please. Let us talk about this inside. We can sort this out. We are family. I met his eyes, and the ghost of the hurt I had felt at his silence vanished entirely, replaced by cold clarity. There is no inside for you today. You had your chance to define what family means, and you did it without me. Rebecca's voice rose to a shrill pitch. You are being selfish! I allowed myself a faint smile, the first honest expression of the day. Maybe. But I learned that word from watching you and your daughters operate in my father's life for the last 10 years. She pointed at the door, her hand shaking. Open it. I shook my head, my voice dropping back to that calm, final register. I won't let strangers in my house. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Strangers. It was the ultimate, absolute severance. For a second, no one moved. The sound of the lake, usually so soothing, seemed to recede entirely. Then everything exploded. Accusations, guilt. Shouting. Rebecca called me cruel. Her daughter screamed that I was ruining their vacation. Robert kept repeating my name, pleadingly, as if the sound of it might magically unlock the deadbolts. I listened. I took in the noise, the chaos, and the indignation. And I felt nothing. No urge to defend myself, no need to justify the locksmith, or the money spent on supplies they would not use. They were not listening now, and they had not listened before. The crucial difference was that this time, their inability to listen did not matter. I stepped back, preparing to close the door. Rebecca lunged forward, trying to force the gap open. You cannot do this! I already did, I said. I pushed the door firmly shut, the heavy wood thudding into the frame. I heard the satisfying click of the new latch securing itself. I stood there, leaning my ear against the wood, listening to the muffled screaming, the sound of bags being dropped back onto the gravel. Robert knocked softly once. Then again, a gentle, weak sound that was instantly drowned out by Rebecca's furious tirade. I did not answer. Eventually, the engine started. I stood by the window and watched them leave. The cars reversed out of the driveway, spitting gravel, and then they were gone. The driveway emptied. The lake stayed still. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The silence that followed their departure was not the heavy, mournful quiet of grief. It was light, breathable, and deeply restorative. The house felt cleansed. It was no longer an emotional battleground or a trophy for Rebecca's entitlement. It was simply a home. Later that evening, the lake house filled with the sound of genuine, easy laughter. My friends arrived, their cars filling the exact space the others had vacated hours earlier. We grilled food on the deck, swam in the deepening twilight, and stayed up late telling stories under the vast, clear canopy of stars. There were no eggshells to walk on, no unspoken demands to accommodate, and no questioning whether anyone deserved to be there. The belonging was instantaneous and mutual. That night, as I locked the new deadbolt and turned off the lights, I realized that power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes, it comes from the simple, quiet act of deciding who gets access to your time, your space, and your generosity. And for the first time in a very long time, that decision felt completely, finally mine. The friends stayed for 3 days. During that time, the lake house transformed. It stopped feeling like a museum dedicated to my mother's ghost, and started feeling like a place to create a present. We cooked simple meals, our skin wrinkled from too much swimming, and the laughter was loud, filling the rooms that had been so cold. There was no tension, and no one made me feel like I had to earn my place at the table. When they left, I didn't feel alone. I felt consolidated. I took the immediate steps that needed to be taken. I blocked Rebecca and her daughters from my phone and social media, without a single explanation or speech. I was done trying to be understood by people who actively benefited from misunderstanding me. The boundary was clean, simple, and effective. A week later, Robert asked to meet. He suggested a cafe in the city, the neutral ground where neither of us held the advantage. He looked older than I remembered, somehow shrunken, as if the weight he had avoided carrying for years had finally settled upon him. He apologized. It wasn't perfect. It was haunting and clearly painful for him. He said he was sorry for his silence, and sorrier still for allowing Rebecca's cruelty to stand as his truth. He admitted that his fear of conflict had cost him my trust. I listened to him, not with bitterness, but with a guarded composure. When he finished, I didn't forgive him on the spot. I told him the truth, a truth I had learned in the most painful way possible. Trust does not come back just because someone finally says the right words, Dad. It is rebuilt slowly, carefully, over time. I established the terms. If we were going to have a relationship, it would be based on respect, not obligation. It would be slow, and it would be on my terms. He nodded, accepting the conditional piece, and for the first time, I actually believed him. When I got home that night, I made another significant decision. I pulled up my laptop, not to review the deed, but to look forward. I contacted a real estate agent and inquired about renting out the lakehouse seasonally. I would turn it into something practical, something that worked for me instead of draining me emotionally. It would be an asset, a sustainable space, not a fragile emotional anchor. As I closed my laptop, the clarity was absolute. I wasn't angry anymore. That summer taught me the most difficult lesson of my life: family is not defined by blood or label, but by respect. The moment someone decides you don't belong, they lose the right to your time, your space, and your generosity. Choosing yourself is not cruel. It is, perhaps, the most necessary act of love there is.